Want your thoughts on this though now? Would housing asylum seekers in Portakabins be a good idea? 0207 862 2222 is the number. Many of us, no doubt, associate Portakabins with building sites and temporary school accommodation, but the Times reports that the company is in talks with local authorities to provide temporary accommodation for homeless people. They've also signalled they would be open to doing a deal with the government to provide emergency homes for asylum seekers. As you can see here, have a look. The cabins they have designed for homeless people are clad in fake brick or wood. They have private bathroom spaces. They have room to cook meals. The lifetime of these cabins is up to 60 years, but the chief exec of Portakabins says they're only meant to be used temporarily. Do you think that association, Gavin, of Portakabins with, you know, when there's work being done at school maybe, or when they're on a building site, is that colouring what we think about the way they could be used?
For me, I using Portakabins for accommodation, I don't think it sits well because of the humanitarian aspect. You know, you want to live in a Portakabin? I don't think so. You know, for me, it's more about how you portray your living standards and where you want to be, where you live effectively. A Portakabin for me, again, like is emergency shelter. It's, you know, a makeshift classroom. It's, you know, a hospital arm, part of a hospital arm. So I don't think it kind of sits well in that respect.
Is it the name though? If we call it modular housing, suddenly it's the future and it's chic. So do you think that kind of perception is maybe the problem?
Possibly. I do see where they're coming from with that. They're trying to not brand it as Portakabin as like a, you know, as a negative connotation around that. But I do think, you know, you're making this makeshift housing, you know, just for people who are really vulnerable. And I don't think it kind of works well because you're sort of making them you know, where you set them up, you'd make them a target effectively for people who would, you know, particularly for asylum seekers. We've seen what's happened in the press recently. He set up this makeshift sort of area of Portakabins, and it doesn't really, for me, it doesn't really sit well with how they'd be perceived in the neighbourhood.
I mean, Claudia, the risk is that you take people out of hotels where we know they're a focus for protests. You put them into Portakabins where actually they might be even more separate from society, not integrated with society. They'll become another focus for these attacks and protests.
I think there will always be extremists wherever these asylum seekers are. I think they'll be a target of, they potentially be a target of abuse. I don't think it matters whether they're in a Portakabin or in a hotel. But you know, you mentioned emergency accommodation, and that's the key word here. We're talking about homeless people and asylum seekers seeking emergency accommodation. So these Portakabins are going to be clean, warm, safe, dry, and cheap as well.
They start that way, don't they? They start that way, and then they're seen as emergency accommodation, and then before we know it,
but long term, how does it?
We're 5 years down the line. They're still being used that way because no alternative has been found.
So you know, it might sound a bit brutal, but beggars can't be choosers. We're talking about people who otherwise have no home. They're going to have a clean, dry roof over their head that they're not going to be paying for. The council are going to be paying for them, but it's going to cost the council £14 per person per night versus the £90 that councils are currently spending per person per night on hotel rooms. So, you know, we're in a financial, like we've got a huge financial burden here. So how are we going to alleviate that? This seems like a perfect opportunity to save lots of money while keeping people safe and accommodated.
Those figures that you say, it's from £14 a night, and it's up to £90 in hotels. So those are the two extremes of those brackets.
But even still, even if they're the extremes, we're not talking about the difference between £60 and £90. We're talking about £14 versus £90, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people here, or tens of thousands of people. So
the cost of keeping people in hotels, Gavin, has become astronomical and is not sustainable in the long term. So do we have to conscience things like this? You know, more, you know, different ways of thinking about what a home looks like to be able to house people even temporarily.
It's an interesting idea. I hear what you're saying, Claudia, but I think for the dignity side of things, you know, do you want to be living in a house that's got, you know, a tin roof with, you know, corrugated iron walls and what have you? I'm just making this as an example of what it could be. It looks very, very nice from the pictures, but the reality is that going to be the future of accommodation for that type of vulnerable person going forward?
Emergency accommodation. We need to keep coming back to that word of this is for people who are really like struggling, and that it's a free lifeline being thrown to them by a council and therefore by the taxpayer.
Okay, let's just remind ourselves of the other options of what we've got at the moment. Have a look at this. The percentages of where people are being, asylum seekers, where they're being housed at the moment. 62% in what's called dispersal housing. So that can be council accommodation of one sort or another, social housing particularly. 31% in hotels. Now we've seen a huge rise in the number of people that are being housed in hotels. Then that leaves about, 7%, doesn't it? So you can split those between detention centres, a few in their warehouses we were talking about last time we talked about this. Tents, we know that some people find their way onto the streets and sleeping in tents. And then we now have this, Portakabins, if you like to call it, modular housing, however you want to rephrase it. Gavin, if they're not going to be here, which one of these would you prefer? Because at the moment, hotels, we know that they're a flashpoint.
I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be more effort to find the space in order to accommodate them in whatever way is possible. There is land that can be developed on. There are areas where housing could be made to a standard where people can live in them without feeling they're living in a tin hut. You know, that's
the problem, is that we have a housing shortage. So for every family of asylum seekers that are going into a home, that's a British family then that don't have access to that home. Ultimately, that's the argument for hotels. But Portakabin seems like a very good compromise. They're also going to be based on brownfield sites that are already owned by the council. So it's using up land and space that's otherwise used for nothing else.
Why is that land? I'm just wondering where this land comes from. That councils have been keeping up their sleeves and not building on up till now, and suddenly they've got room to put Portakabin.
They do. So all of these, there's 11 councils so far that have made deals with Portakabin, and they all have patches of land. I mean, I suppose if you're stacking Portakabins on top of each other like that, you don't need a huge amount of space to provide quite a lot of accommodation.
Absolutely, it doesn't look like a Portakabin to me. That looks like a nice little new build. I don't think I appreciate the idea, the initiative, but the reality is I don't think it will look like that.
Okay. Also, any story I hear that's going to boost British manufacturing is great. They've got the factory in York.
We've got loads of calls coming in on this. Kirsty's in Essex. Kirsty, would you be happy to house asylum seekers in Portakabins?
Not at the moment, no, because if you're a single man that goes to Southend Council and stays at your home, they will give you a tent and a piece of paper to tell you where you can get a free breakfast from. So those people would love to be in Portakabins. They would love to have the hotel rooms. They would love housing, but instead they have to put all their tents together at night so that they've got the security to look after each other's backs.
Well, Kirsty, this idea has come from the fact that councils are looking at housing homeless people in this way. So it's not as if it's either or. We have a problem with the number of asylum seekers in this country. A lot of people saying it's something that needs to be sorted out. Why is this such a poor solution? Why does this look like luxury to you?
No, it's one of these things that I appreciate there's plenty of asylum seekers coming over, but we have veterans that have fought and put their lives on the line for our country, living in tents because they've not been prioritised as to be given hotel rooms or housing. Surely our veterans that have put their lives on the line should come first. OK,
Kirsty, I'm going to put this to you. If an asylum seeker is being processed, is going through that process of establishing how much risk they are in, if their life is in risk, do you not need to put them somewhere where you know where they are? If you put them on the streets in tents so you can house a veteran, that process, they could disappear into society. You'll never be able to deport them if you have to at the end of the asylum process.
That's fine. So what you do is you put the tents in the old army camps and things like that have already got security around them and let them live in tents, because surely that has got to be better from where they have come from. OK,
Kirsty, thanks for your call. Take another one. Richard is in Hampshire. The Portakabins, modular housing, Richard, if you want to call it that. Does that make sense as an emergency measure to house asylum seekers?
Yeah. If I was a refugee and travelled thousands of miles to escape persecution and I got somewhere, anything with a roof over my head, running water, electricity, I'd be absolutely made up. Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
And what about this idea that that is still space that could be occupied by a veteran, a homeless person who maybe have been homeless for years in this country?
Well, yeah, I completely agree with the lady you've just had on. Yeah, it's hard. And unfortunately, we're only little islands. We can't take everybody, but we have a right to help people that have travelled, you know, they're getting shot or whatever in their own country. We've got, you know, we're nice people in this country. Sometimes we're too nice.
You think we're too nice to people that have escaped war zones?
No. But you know, we can't sort of like let everybody in, can we? At the end of the day.
Yeah, it feels.
Some people are economic migrants. Some people are persecuted. Yeah. How do you decide who's actually trying to get here? Well, you know, because because they're on the rob, on the fiddle, whatever. How do we know who's on the rob, on the fiddle, and who's actually a proper sort of like escaping persecution migrant? It's a difficult one.
Well, that's what the asylum process is there for, Richard.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's a difficult process to go through, and I my heart goes out to these poor people in Gaza and all that. My heart goes out to them, you know. Yeah. But what can you do about war zones?
Okay. Thanks for your call, Richard. Let's take another one. Dennis is in Wrexham. Portakabins, Dennis. Do you think they're the answer?
I think it is a good idea. Myself.
Yep.
Because they have been housing them in hotels and different things. And a gentleman had an empty house next door to him, and they put asylum seekers in this house. Next door to him. Right?
Yes.
Got that?
Yep,
right?
Got it.
So, they were antisocial, noise and everything.
Are they?
So he said, I'm going to sell up.
Yeah.
So he went to the estate agent to find out how much his house would cost to buy. So they said to him, have you got neighbours? He says, yes, I've got asylum seekers. He said, bear with me now. Your house is devalued by over £10,000 now because of them.
Okay, Dennis, that is one instance, isn't it? That's one guy trying to sell his house. Presumably, the asylum seekers aren't going to be there forever. I mean, is that the way it's going to be, that they're going to occupy that home forever?
Well, he doesn't know that, does he?
Right. He's trying to sell right now.
If they were there that long, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
Dennis's example there, Gavin, it just shows why a lot of people would think it makes sense to have one processing hub, a place where actually you understand that the people who are in there are going through a process. They can be identified, you know where they're located, so whatever they have to do, whether they get to stay in the country or whether they get deported, that place is where they're going to be, one location.
But that puts a massive target on the location, you know, where Croydon allegedly is where the first site is set to be. I don't see how it could fit with the area where you have a group of asylum seekers or homeless within that sort of area designated for the Portakabins. And it just feels like it's the lowest, it's a bit of a cop-out really. It's the lowest kind of area where we can sort of like, the lowest sort of like solution we can sort of think to get people off the streets and away from mainstream housing. Yeah,
do you not think, Claudia, that we are caught now between whatever accommodation we provide, it's either going to be, like Gavin's saying, you know, on the borders of inhumanity to keep people there for any length of time, or then, as the calls show, that it's almost too good. There's no space in the middle for something that's actually fit for purpose. I would be really upset to think somebody that is receiving charity, which is essentially what this is they've fled from a country where they're being persecuted or they're at risk of death, and they are being given a house with a private bathroom. They've got an area for a kitchen, they've got a TV, they've got hot running water, it's safe and secure and clean, and that's not good enough. I think ultimately that's the way we have to see this. It is charity. Yeah. They're being given a lifeline, and I think that they will be very grateful, whether they're homeless or whether they're asylum seekers. What an incredible opportunity to have
a clean, warm, safe home that's dry, and it's not costing the council as much as it is for the council to put them in hotels.
OK, we need to remember, obviously, these are proposals at the moment. It's something that is being seen through for homeless people, but not necessarily for asylum seekers yet, even if Portakabin want it to be the case. We're going to move on. Don't forget, later we'll ask whether artificial intelligence needs to be banned in schools. And if you